I don't know who exactly started the malicious rumor that Dolores Madrigal was the so-called true villain of Encanto. However, many other YouTube channels, no doubt eager to be part of the in-group, have continued to spread this malicious rumor. Some have even claimed to come up with the idea themselves. At first, I was content to simply ignore these rumors. Then I watched a video by Oakhorn exploring whether or not Dolores is autistic. Inspired by this video, I have decided to take up arms and defend Dolores' good name against the malicious attacks against her character. I expect this battle to be both brutal and one-sided.
Dolores has enhanced hearing powers. She can hear the sound of falling sand, and she even tells Mirabel that she heard Luisa's eye twitching. Yet when Mirabel tried to warn everyone about the magic fading and the cracks in the walls, Dolores likely heard it all.
Did Dolores ever deny having heard the casita cracking? I would imagine that she'd been having the phrase "speak only when spoken to" her hammered into her head since shortly after her 5th birthday, when she first would have received the ability to hear everything that was being said in the Encanto, including private conversations. I would also expect that Alma had been making it very clear that she did not want to hear anything suggesting that there might be something wrong with the magic or the family in general. That woman did love the word perfect. It seems pretty obvious to me that the reason why Dolores was keeping her mouth shut is because that is exactly what she had been taught to do from a very young age. What? You thought that she was born fully grown, fully clothed, fully educated, and ready to take on the world like Athena popping out of the head of Zeus?
Well, that's because Dolores wanted the miracle to die.
The cut in Mirabel's hand was proof that something was wrong. Either she was telling the truth about the cracks in the casita, or she was starting to self mutilate, which should have held more weight in the minds of intelligent, mature individuals than Dolores' mere silence. And as the 50-year-old mother of three, Julieta should have had enough intelligence and maturity to draw her own conclusions based on the facts in front of her. And yet she spent the better part of a minute trying to convince Mirabel that the cracks were nothing more than a figment of her imagination, even as she prepared the remedy to heal Mirabel's cut hand. She then wrapped up the conversation by reminding Mirabel about what had happened to Bruno, saying, "I don't want the same thing to happen to you," which is a nice way of saying, "You are never to speak of this again, young lady." When Augustine saw the vision that Mirabel had found and reassembled, he was looking at proof that she had been telling the truth. His response was to stuff the pieces into his pocket and tell Mirabel in no uncertain terms that she was to say nothing about it. In other words, Mirabel's own parents were actively trying to silence her. Does that prove that they wanted the magic to die, or does it prove that people with the moral courage to stand up and be counted were few and far between in the Encanto? Let's consider Mirabel's status. When the door that was supposed to define her role within the family and the Encanto in general disappeared, the family matriarch went from being a warm and affectionate grandmother to cold and disdainful. She ignored Mirabel when she could, excluded her from family events such as Antonio's gift ceremony, and when she did acknowledge Mirabel's presence, it was generally to speak harshly at her. Didn't she once suggest that Mirabel should follow Bruno's example and go away?
Town relies on our family, on our gifts. So the best way for some of us to help is to step aside.
Isabella was not the only one to pick up on this. Julieta basically ran the kitchen. As such, she could throw around a good deal of weight if she chose to. She could have insisted that her youngest daughter be moved out of the nursery and into a room of her own when Antonio was born, even a repurposed storeroom, on the grounds that taking care of a newborn child is far too demanding a job for a 10 to 12-year-old. A girl should not have to go through puberty while sharing the room she is sleeping in with a male cousin of any age, that Mirabel was still a member of the family, whether or not she had a gift or not, and should be treated with a certain level of dignity, and that the kitchen would be closed for renovations until everyone agreed to this. Obviously, she never bothered to do such a thing.
I call it the not special special, since, you have no gift.
Was it really necessary for that shopkeeper to shove the fact that Mirabel lacked a magical ability in her face in front of a bunch of children who were naturally going to follow the lead of the adult?
Maybe your gift is being in denial.
When it came to throwing Mirabel under the bus, Dolores not only had plenty of company, she had at least two role models who should have been setting better examples. Given all of this and what I've already mentioned, I honestly doubt that I would have been brave enough to speak up had I been in Dolores' place when Mirabel first tried to raise the alarm, and I have a very strong hunch that the people who are trying to cast Dolores as the villain would also have stayed silent. People do have a tendency to project their own worst qualities onto other individuals. I have had personal experience with such people. I can describe specific examples. So I have reason to speak with confidence when I say that the people who are trying to cast Dolores as the villain are probably doing so because they don't want to admit that they would have also stayed silent in her situation. I told you this was going to be brutal.
And Bruno, she knew he was living in the walls the whole time. But did she say anything? Nope.
Perhaps the most popular song out of Encanto is We Don't Talk About Bruno, which established that he had been a taboo subject since going into hiding when Dolores herself would have been about 12 years old, and since before she'd even been born. Do you really believe that that would not have influenced Dolores' willingness to speak openly about Bruno? Or are you just ignoring that song because it doesn't fit with what you want to believe? After overhearing Mirabel talking with Camilo pretending to be Dolores, the real Dolores came up beside Mirabel and told her that
The only one worried about the magic is you. And the rats talking in the walls.
Dolores was not the one with the ability to understand animals. Yes, she could hear the rats talking, but how would she know what they were saying? Why would she even mention the rats unless she was trying to drop a hint about someone whom she was not at liberty to talk about, but thought might be able to help Mirabel in her investigation? Why follow that up by mentioning Louise's eye twitching unless she thought that could be helpful? Isn't it suspicious that the people who include Dolores' ability to hear Louise's eye twitching in their case against her will completely ignore the fact that she gave what turned out to be a useful piece of information to Mirabel without the slightest prompting?
She even admitted that she knew that Bruno was living in the house the entire time, and she didn't help Mirabel find him because Dolores knew that if Mirabel found Bruno, they would be able to fix the miracle.
If that was true, then why wasn't she taking active steps, such as telling Abuela that Mirabel had broken into Bruno's tower to retrieve his lost vision, that Bruno himself was living within the walls of the casita, and recommend courses of action that would have put an end to Mirabel's investigation, such as sending guys with machetes after Bruno to drive him out of the valley? Why did she not try to prevent Bruno and Mirabel from having their shared vision? Why did she not try to stop Mirabel from talking with Isabella? Are you sure you can make a case for her inaction being anything other than a lack of moral courage?
For this reason, there is a theory that Dolores lied to her sister. In this scene, Dolores says,
Tonight, he wants 5 babies.
Wonderful.
in fact, the reason Dolores tells this lie here is to alienate her sister Isabella from Mariano, because
This is one of the first videos I found claiming that Dolores was lying to Isabella, and as you may have noticed, it referred to them as sisters, when in fact they were cousins. Their mothers were sisters. The fact that the original content creator could not take the trouble to get such a clear and well-established detail straight completely discredits them as a source of reliable information. I'd even go so far to say that they were lying, especially since the two things I know about Mariano are that he was a hopeless romantic and that he wasn't very bright. So the idea that he would want 5 babies seems entirely in character for him, unless someone can provide verification that Mariano did not want 5 babies from a source that is actually reliable. How does Jared Bush, Brian Howard, and Clarissa Castro Smith sound? I believe Isabella has something she wants to say.
I never wanted to marry him. I was doing it for the family.
Knowing this, I find it very easy to look at her expression when Mariano was offering her the engagement ring and imagine her thinking, "Somebody please get me out of here!" Because there was no way she was going to refuse and spend the rest of her life being ostracized by the only community that she was ever likely to know. And if anyone at that table was likely to know what was really going through her mind, it would have been the one with the ability to hear her sobbing or even screaming into her pillow at night. And whose idea was it that Isabella marry a man for whom she never displayed, declared, or as it turns out, felt any affection? Who created the environment in which neither she nor apparently Dolores were free to talk about how they felt regarding Mariano? Is it my imagination, or are the people who are trying to cast Dolores as the villain going out of their way to ignore how her dear grandmother had been behaving throughout the entire movie. Abuela Alma had allowed her only son to be blamed for things as trivial as hair loss by people whose parents and grandparents had narrowly escaped a massacre. She yelled at Peppa every time Peppa's agitation expressed itself in the weather instead of trying to calm her down the way the Felix and later Camilo did. She tried to live vicariously through Isabella, forcing her into a perfect girl image and insisting that she marry a man for no other reason than because he happened to look like her own late husband. She treated Luisa like a piece of farming equipment, insisting that she do jobs that either did not need doing or were somebody else's responsibility. And need I remind you how she treated Mirabelle ever since the door to the girl's room disappeared? Ignoring her, excluding her from family events, speaking harshly at her, even accusing her of deliberately trying to hurt the family after Mirabelle had tried to explain how the candle had started burning more brightly and the cracks healed when she and Isabella finally started opening up to each other. Ignoring all of this in order to believe that Dolores was somehow the true villain of Encanto is not a sign of intelligence, entirely the opposite. I don't know if any of these people ever read the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, but spoiler alert, the Emperor, his entire court, and almost everybody in the capital city made complete and utter fools of themselves because they were all trying to show how clever they were instead of looking at what was right in front of them. As for that little bombshell Dolores dropped during dinner with the Guzmans, that's what the family should have been talking about in the first place. When Augustine saw the vision that Mirabelle had found and reassembled, he was looking at proof that they were now in the middle of a full-blown crisis, that whatever calamity Bruno had foreseen, it would be happening soon, that they could not wait for Abuela to get over her obsession with perfect. If he had gone downstairs and apologized to the Guzmans, saying that a family emergency had come up, absolutely cannot wait, we'll talk again in the morning, good night, ushered them out the door, and then told the rest of the family about the vision, he would have had at least some control over what happened next. There would have probably still been a family-wide meltdown, but at least no one else would have been there to watch. Good intentions aside, trying to cover up what he now knew to be the truth was perhaps the worst choice Augustine could have made. By whispering what Mirabelle had found to the other members of the family, Dolores was doing exactly what he should have done. By blurting out the news in front of everyone, she was bailing her cousin out of what she no doubt had good reason to believe would have been a miserable marriage for Isabella and Mariano both, and she was putting herself on the firing line by doing so. The Encanto was the kind of community in which there were no strangers. I doubt anyone who watches or posts videos online, myself included, truly understands what that means. What I do understand is that within a couple hours of that dinner breaking up, everybody would have known what Dolores had done, making her about as popular as her uncle Bruno. And while her actions did put Mirabelle on the spot, that may have actually been a good thing.
The second you saw the vision, think of the family.
I was thinking of my dog.
Mama, you've always been too hard on Mirabelle.
For 10 years, the magical family matriarch had been mistreating and by her example encouraging other people to mistreat Mirabelle. And what were Mirabelle's oh so wonderful parents doing about it?
I healed your hand with my love for my daughter, with her wonderful brain, big heart, cool glasses.
Mama.
Almost nothing. Abuela had to get in their faces before they found the moral courage to stand up and tell that old woman that she had no business treating their daughter in such a fashion.
Yeah, and if you look up Dolores' name, it literally means pain. And
Since when are pain and sorrow synonyms for villain, evil, or malicious? The admittedly small number of Disney villains whose history I know anything about were all victims of an injustice real or perceived. Maleficent, depending on which version you went with, had either been insulted by the royal family or had been betrayed and mutilated by a man she had known and trusted since they were children because he wanted to be king. Virgo felt that his rightful spotlight was being stolen by unworthy upstarts. Based on what he told Anna, Hans was being psychologically, perhaps physically bullied by his 12 older brothers. Syndrome had been dissed by his hero and would-be role model. Dolores was not the victim of injustice. Mirabelle and Bruno were victims of injustice. Dolores had been given a gift with a few headaches attached. I seem to be running out of bad guys to fight here.
The most bizarre thing is that when we see Mirabelle create the family door in the end, everyone on the door is smiling except for Dolores.
At least one of Dolores' detractors agrees that the picture in front of the new casita was Mirabelle's creation.
Strangely, when Mirabelle creates the family door at the end, Dolores is the only one.
Two of Dolores' detractors agree on this. So they would also have to agree that that picture represented how Mirabelle saw her family, in which case Dolores' fundamentally neutral expression may mean nothing more than that Mirabelle was accustomed to her autistic cousin smiling only when she was especially excited or happy, such as a couple of minutes later, after the magic had been restored, Isabella, Luisa, Antonio, Peppa, and presumably Dolores herself had all had a chance to get reacquainted with their gifts, at which point they all lined up for a family photo, in which Dolores was clearly smiling, proving that A, she was actually quite happy with how things had turned out, and B, the people who were trying to vilify her were once again shamelessly cherry-picking details. Finally, I will challenge the claim that Dolores would have ever wanted the magic to die in the first place. Yes, she did have a problematic gift, almost as bad as her mother's, but it had its perks, such as being able to hear a chorus a mile away. And as someone who regularly goes out into the forest without earbuds, I can assure you that there would be sounds around the Encanto that would be a joy to listen to. Dolores had had her gift since she was 5 years old, and she was 22 by the main events of the movie, which means she had her gift over 3/4 of her life. When someone has an ability for over 3/4 of their life, they simply are used to it. And the apparent ease with which she could pick a single piece of information out of what to the rest of us would be an unimaginable amount of background chatter tells me that her mind and brain had been adapted to her gift, possibly since she had been born. Before dinner with the Guzmans, which is when everyone's gift started acting up, the only time Dolores displayed any kind of physical discomfort was in the presence of unusually loud noises which could have made people with perfectly normal levels of hearing flinch. Prior to the casita coming down, I doubt that she could have imagined life without her gift any more than Isabella or Luisa could. And if the way Abuela had been acting throughout the movie was anything to go by, then for the past 45 odd years she'd been telling first her children, then her grandchildren, that their fate, fortune, status, indeed the justification for their very existence within the Encanto, lived or died with the magic. Dolores would have grown up believing that without her super hearing, she was nothing. She simply would not have seen it as being within her best interest to destroy or allow the magic to be destroyed, which is probably why she was the first person to help Mirabelle in her investigation, by dropping hints about Bruno and where to find him, telling her about Luis's eye twitching. Yes, she could have done more, and she could have done it sooner. But her aunt and uncle, who should have been setting examples for her generation, took almost a day longer and needed a good swift kick in the complacency which she helped to deliver before they started supporting Mirabelle in anything resembling a meaningful sort of way. The problem is that it's human nature to follow the leader even when common sense is screaming warnings at us. Abuela Alma could have been a good leader if she'd gotten the emotional support she needed after her dear Pedro had died. As it was, she had developed a very unhealthy view of herself, her family, and the roles they played in the community, and could not see that she was leading her family off of a cliff until her house came crashing down in front of her, while Augustine and Julieta were desperately calling to the girl whom she had been treating with such utter disdain for the past 10 years to forget about what they had always felt was the source of their magic and get to safety. Even Mirabelle had been content to blindly follow along until seeing cracks forming in the casita, arguably her closest and most supportive friend, forced her to accept the fact that there was something seriously wrong. Then began her difficult journey of overcoming physical obstacles, learning to question everything she had been taught, going well outside of her comfort zone, and finally being pushed beyond her willingness to accept abuse for the sake of what might be mistakenly referred to as peace. Only then could she become the leader that her family needed. The toxic environment that was hurting the family and killing the magic was well established by the time Dolores had been born. She was not the true villain. Anyone who wants me to believe that she was had better start limbering up, because it's going to take a far more impressive display of mental gymnastics than the pitiful and often repeated routines I've seen so far. I think that about wraps that up, but that's just my opinion. What do the rest of you think?